There is a specific kind of tired that nobody talks about. Not physical tired, not even emotionally depleted tired. A different kind entirely. It is the tired that comes from spending years being the person who felt everything in the room before anyone spoke. The one who absorbed the grief in a conversation the way a cloth absorbs water, thoroughly, automatically, without being asked. The one who left ordinary interactions feeling hollowed out in a way that didn't make sense because nothing dramatic had happened. Just a Tuesday, just a conversation, just the accumulated weight of being the kind of person who cannot not feel what other people are carrying. If you know that tired, you know it is not a character flaw. You know it is not weakness. But you may have been told it is. Told to toughen up, to build thicker skin, to stop taking things so personally, to stop letting other people's problems become your problems. And somewhere in the gap between what you were told and what you actually experienced, a belief began to form. A quiet, corrosive belief that the way you were wired was the problem, that the depth of your feeling was the source of your suffering, that if you could just feel less, you would hurt less. I want to dismantle that belief today, not with reassurance, not with a kind of comfortable validation that sounds good and changes nothing, with something more useful than that, with the truth about what actually broke you, what it built in the breaking, and why the sensitivity you have been trying to manage is not the wound. It is the instrument. And the difference between those two framings is the difference between spending the rest of your life treating yourself as something fragile to be protected and spending it as something extraordinary that simply required the right kind of container to hold it. Let me start with a truth that is uncomfortable before it is liberating. You were not broken by feeling too much. You were broken by feeling too much without anything strong enough to hold it. There is a profound difference between those two things. A river does not destroy a landscape because it flows. It destroys a landscape when the banks that contain it are too narrow, too weak, or absent entirely. The water is not the problem. It is the most powerful force in the natural world, carving canyons, sustaining ecosystems, generating entire civilizations. But without banks, without form, without the structure that gives it direction and limits, that same water floods everything indiscriminately. It does not choose what it nourishes and what it drowns. It simply floods. Your sensitivity is the river. What broke you was not its depth. It was the absence of banks strong enough to give it form. Carl Jung spent his career studying what happens when people fail to contain their own depths. Not because their depths were wrong, because they had been taught, by family, by culture, by the accumulated weight of other people's discomfort with genuine feeling, that their depths were a problem to be managed rather than a resource to be developed. And the management always looked the same. Suppress. Perform okayness. Give more than you receive and call it virtue. Let other people's pain become yours and call it compassion. Dissolve the border between where you end and someone else begins and call it love. And Jung, who understood something about the human psyche that most people resist understanding, saw what that management produced. Not resilience, not protection, a specific kind of fracturing. The fracturing that happens when a person turns their most extraordinary quality against themselves. I want to tell you about a concept that changed the way I understood everything about this. Not as a piece of academic information, as something you are going to feel click into place somewhere that is not your head. Jung called it the shadow. And the shadow is not what most people think it is. It is not the dark parts of yourself. It is not your capacity for anger or your need for rest or the moments when you have nothing left to give. Those things are not dark, they are human. What the shadow actually is, and this is the thing that most content in this space is too comfortable to say out loud, is everything you exiled from yourself in order to be acceptable. For most people with the kind of sensitivity we are talking about today, the shadow is full of very specific things. Your anger. Not abstract philosophical anger, the real kind. The kind that says this is not okay and I am not going to absorb it. Your needs. The ones you learned to minimize because your needs made other people uncomfortable and their discomfort felt like your responsibility to prevent. Your number. The clean, unqualified, no explanation required no that you swallowed 1,000 times because saying it felt like cruelty and you would rather fracture yourself than cause someone else discomfort. Your hunger. The part of you that wants things, that wanted to be held when you were holding everyone else. that wanted someone to ask how you were and actually wait for the real answer instead of the performed answer. That hunger is in the shadow, along with your frustration, your limits, your recognition of when someone is using you. Your right to protect yourself from people who are consuming you. You exiled these things not because they were evil, because you were taught through direct instruction or through the quieter teaching of what happened when you expressed them, that a truly compassionate person doesn't feel those things, that a truly loving person doesn't have those needs, that the deepest version of caring means having no requirements for how you are cared for in return, and you were so committed to being the caring person, so oriented around love and connection and the alleviation of other people's pain, that you accepted this teaching. You locked those parts away, and you became the person everyone brought their pain to, because you had demonstrated comprehensively that you had no pain of your own that would inconvenience them. That is the actual mechanism of what broke you. Not sensitivity, not depth, the systematic exile of the parts of yourself that would have protected your sensitivity, the eviction of your own wolf. I want to stay with this wolf for a moment because it is the most important image in this entire conversation. Close your eyes for a moment if you can. Picture a wolf, not a cartoon wolf, a real one, intelligent beyond what most animals allow you to see, alert, still in a way that contains enormous force rather than absence of it. This wolf has teeth, not decorative teeth, functional ones. This wolf can be tender. Wolves are profoundly social animals who grieve their dead and raise their young in community. But that tenderness is chosen. It is offered consciously to those who have earned it. It is protected by the capacity to also do something else entirely when what approaches is not safe. The wolf can feel warmth without being consumed by it, can experience connection without dissolving into it, can love without losing itself in the love, can go still when what approaches deserves stillness, and move with absolute precision when what approaches deserves something else. That wolf is not the opposite of your compassion. It is its foundation. Without the wolf, compassion becomes codependency. Without the wolf, boundaries become impossible because you have no enforcer. Without the wolf, love becomes a flood without banks, pouring into everything indiscriminately, nourishing what deserves to be nourished, and exhausting itself on what was never going to receive it properly in the first place. You did not exile the wolf because you were weak. You exiled it because somewhere, someone communicated, loudly, quietly, directly, indirectly, that a person with your kind of heart was not supposed to have teeth, and you believed them. Because you wanted to be good, and wanting to be good is one of the most exploitable things a person can want, because goodness is easy to define in ways that benefit everyone except you. The shadow work, the reclamation of the wolf, is not about becoming hard. I need to be precise about this because it is the most common misunderstanding in this entire space. People hear, reclaim your anger, and they imagine becoming someone who lashes out. People hear, reclaim your no, and they imagine becoming someone who withholds. People hear, reclaim your needs, and they imagine becoming someone who demands. That is not what is happening here. What is happening is something much quieter and much more structural. You are building the banks. You are not changing the river. You are giving it form, giving it direction, giving it the contained structure that lets it be what it actually is: immensely powerful, life-giving, beautiful, and precise, rather than what it becomes without containment, which is a flood that destroys what it was meant to nourish. Here is what that looks like in the actual texture of a day. Not as a technique, as an internal shift in orientation. It looks like the moment someone tells you something painful about their life, and you feel the familiar pull toward it. The pull to absorb it, to make it yours, to solve it, to sit inside it with them until it is somehow better. And for the first time, you pause in that pull long enough to ask yourself a question you have never asked in that moment before. Is this mine to carry? Not as a way of being cold, not as a way of not caring, as a genuine inquiry. What is actually being asked of me here? And what am I capable of giving without it costing me something I cannot afford to lose? That question is the wolf. The wolf does not stop you from caring. It asks your caring to be conscious rather than automatic, to be chosen rather than reflexive, to be given from a place of genuine abundance rather than from a place of compulsive self-sacrifice that leaves you emptied and calls it love. It looks like the moment you feel the familiar sensation of needing to apologize for taking up space in a conversation, in a relationship, in a room, and recognizing that sensation as information rather than instruction. That feeling is not telling you that you are too much. That feeling is the scar tissue from every time someone communicated that you were too much. It is old data from an old environment. You do not have to act on it. You are allowed to notice it, name it internally, and then take up exactly as much space as you actually need to take up. Not more, not less. The amount that is genuinely yours. It looks like the moment someone does something that costs you something real, and you feel the familiar sequence begin. The justification of their behavior, the construction of the narrative in which you are perhaps being too sensitive, the softening of your own response before you have even fully felt what you felt, and you stop the sequence before it completes. Not because you have decided to be difficult, because you have decided to be accurate. What they did had an effect on you. That effect is real. It is allowed to be real before it is processed through the filter of whether it is convenient for it to be real. These moments are not dramatic. They do not feel like breakthroughs. They feel, honestly, a lot like discomfort. Because you are interrupting a pattern that has been running for years and is significantly faster than your conscious mind. You will not get it right most of the time at first. You will feel the old pull complete itself before you noticed it happening, and then you will notice it afterward. That noticing afterward is not failure. That noticing afterward is the wolf beginning to wake up. It is the first evidence that the exile is ending. I want to talk now about what gets built in the breaking. Because this is the part of this conversation that is either true or it is not, and I do not want to offer you a comfortable narrative if it is not actually true for you. So I want to be careful here. I am not going to tell you that your suffering had a purpose. That is not mine to say. I do not know what happened to you. I do not know what you absorbed or endured or gave until you had nothing left. And I am not going to construct a retrospective meaning for pain that may not have deserved to exist. That kind of meaning-making can be a form of bypassing the reality of what you went through rather than honoring it. What I can tell you, with precision based on something that is observable and real, is this. A person who has felt deeply and been broken by the depth of their feeling and then done the specific work of building the container, of reclaiming the wolf, of integrating the shadow rather than continuing to manage it, that person has access to something that cannot be taught, studied, or simulated. They can sit with another human being in the worst moment of that person's life and remain present without needing the moment to be different. Not because they are unfeeling, because they have felt what the other person is feeling, not abstractly, in the body. And they survived it. And they know, not intellectually, in the body, that survival is possible. And that knowledge communicates itself not through words, but through the quality of presence they bring into the room. A quality that says, this is survivable, and I know because I survived it, and you do not have to manage how I feel about what you are showing me. That presence is extraordinarily rare. Most people who have not been broken by their sensitivity cannot provide it. They can provide comfort, which is different. They can provide sympathy, which is different. But the specific quality of presence that comes from having felt something completely, survived it, and integrated it rather than managed it around, that is only available to someone who has made the specific journey you have been making. And it is not available because you suffered. It is available because you chose, or are choosing, to do something with the suffering rather than just carry it. Jung called the person who has made this journey the wounded healer. But he was careful, much more careful than most people who cite him, about what that phrase actually means. It does not mean the wound makes you a healer. It does not mean the breaking was necessary. It means that the journey of honest self-confrontation, of facing what broke you, and then doing the actual work of integration rather than just surviving, produces a quality of understanding that is genuinely useful to other people
in a way that an unbroken person's understanding is not. The wound is not the credential, the integration is. And here is what I want to leave you with, because I think this is the piece that most content in this space misses entirely and that matters most.
The integration is not a destination. It is not a state you arrive at and then inhabit permanently. It is a practice. A daily, mundane, frequently unglamorous practice of catching yourself mid-exile, mid-apology for taking up space, mid-absorption of someone else's pain as your own, mid-construction of the narrative in which your feelings are the problem, and choosing, this one time, to do it differently. Choosing to leave your anger in the room instead of swallowing it. Choosing to name what you need instead of performing the absence of needs. Choosing to feel what you feel completely before you process it through anyone else's comfort. Not forever, not as a permanent stance, just this time, and then the next time, and the time after that. Until the wolf is no longer something you have to consciously reclaim. Until it is simply present, alert, functional, yours. That wolf does not make you less compassionate. It makes your compassion something you can actually sustain. Because compassion that exhausts you is not sustainable compassion. It is a kind of slow violence against yourself that you have learned to perform as virtue. And sustainable compassion, compassion that comes from genuine fullness rather than the pretense of fullness while you are secretly running on empty, is the only kind that actually helps anyone. Because people can feel the difference. They cannot always name it, but they feel it. The difference between someone who is present with them from overflow and someone who is present with them despite being depleted. Only one of those presences can be trusted to stay. You are building something that has never existed in you before. Not a tougher version of yourself, not a harder one. Something rarer than either of those things. A version of yourself that is exactly as tender as you have always been. That feels with the same depth, that sees with the same precision, that loves with the same extraordinary capacity, and that is, for the first time, not at war with its own strength, not apologizing for its needs, not performing the absence of limits, not flooding everything in its path because there are finally banks strong enough to give it form. A river with banks is not less powerful than a flood. It is more powerful, because its power has direction, and direction is what turns force into something that actually builds things rather than just washing them away. You spend enough time flooding. It is time to flow.